והשב ישראל, והשב ישראל, והשב ישראל לי לבן, והשב ישראל, והשב ישראל, והשב ישראל לי לבן.
Welcome everybody to this edition of the Articulation series, where art informs Torah and Torah is formed in art. Each week we celebrate the art of another artist and together enjoined in study with another Jewish spiritual leader. They have studied together for several months. In this particular case, since the beginning of the year, they've looked at the Torah and opened up worlds inside of worlds. Today we have before us Rabbanit Aliza Sperling, who teaches at the Maharat Yeshivat Chovevei Torah Beit Midrash program. She is also the director of Her Torah, an innovative women's Torah study and community program that brings women across the Jewish world together to learn from and with one another. Aliza received smicha from Yeshivat Maharat and a JD from NYU Law School. We're also honored to have Melanie Siegel, who is a textile artist, educator, and exhibition coordinator. Her work in textile creation is innovative yet simplistic. Presently on several volunteer committees, Melanie is the co-chair of the museum committee at Baycrest, specializing in the installations. As an artist in residence, Ontario Arts Council Education Grant recipient for the York Region District School Board, she has taught more than 700 students in felting workshops per school year and created permanent legacy projects. A graduate from the Ontario College of Art, Melanie has acquired many awards, published and exhibited her work in Canada, US, and abroad. With such an acclaimed group of creative souls, we are sure to have a beautiful evening of conversation in Torah. And before we begin, Rabbanit Aliza, would you please frame Parshat Shlach for us?
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see you, and I'm so happy to be here with Melanie and with Dvir. I just want to give a special shout out, first of all, to Rabbi Kahana. It's so nice to see you. And also to my other artist collaborator, Richard McBee. It's so nice to see you again. So this week's Parsha is Parshat Shlach, where we have the very famous story of the sin of the spies, where Moses tells the 12 spies to go to the land of Canaan and check it out, and then come back and report to the people. And when the spies come back, they've basically hatched a plan, it seems. They've conspired to come back and they tell the people, oh, the land is very good. And then they say, FS, but that's all for nothing, right? Because the people, they're so big and they're so powerful and they're going to destroy us. And so the people are listening to these 10 spies who are their leaders. You know, Moses chose the leaders of the people to go out, and even their leaders are misleading them, or maybe they're so scared that they're trying to dissuade the people from entering into the land. And there are only 2 of the spies who are able to resist. Caleb and Joshua. And we're going to talk about those two spies in greater detail later. The people start crying. They say, what are we going to do? They have no faith in God's ability to bring them into the land. And as a result, God says that instead of entering the land immediately, they are going to spend the next 40 years wandering in the desert. And so the children of Israel spend the next 40 years in the wilderness until the next generation is ready to go into the land. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Melanie.
A very interesting story, and we studied in somewhat of depth, and my response was to get my hands right into making these people, and how are these people going to travel, and they're going to study of the land. So are they in a hot climate? Are they in a cold climate? And all my work that I created became delving into the textile and the scraps that I use. All of my work is based on using felt and stitching and all the scraps from everywhere that I have. So they became lively, and I created these 12 spies and created a wall hanging that they should be movement. Now, when I put this wall hanging on the wall and put a wind on it, or the fan that's going, they move. So my work has a movement as well. And that was very exciting to discover, that it's not a static thing, they're moving. So that was an interesting observation when creating these 12 spies. And I did a second project, was a Torah mantle that I had started more than 10 years ago. And that became another project, not only for this study, but for another study. And that was, Devere will bring up pictures, and that it's all about the land. So the top of the Torah mantle is about the land in the north, and it runs down the Mediterranean, and then we have the desert. So these spies were generally, I understand, wandering through desert. So hopefully I've created work that depicts that. Okay, so this is one Torah mantle. This was done a prelude to the one that I did for this particular project, but this was, it's all done with thread. There's no fabric in this. This is all created with thread. So this one isn't for this project, but we're just showing it anyways. And that is the breastplate of the Kohanim. And I did some research into where each stone was supposed to be. You can't really tell, but this is all very gold. It's all done in gold thread. And I have this technique that I do, that I stitch thread on a specific plastic, and the plastic dissolves in water. So that's my little trick. And when you put it in water, the bottom and the top become the same, and it becomes a fabric. So that was exciting. But that's not part of this project, but that's a prelude to the one that I did for this project. Thank you, Devere, for showing my piece. This is the one that I created for this. It's all done in silver thread, and you can see the Mediterranean by the blue running down the front. Right, so there it is. So I work very abstract, so you have to think about that. The bottom is the desert, and the desert in the back, so it's very deep, rich, brown colors. And then there's embellishments as well, and it's all silver and gold. Doesn't really show that well in these pictures, but I appreciate showing it. And there we have some embellishments. These pieces belong to a cousin of mine. My cousin Louise gave me her things to take apart, and this is a part of a beautiful plate that came from China. And because it went into a Chinese exhibition, I add everything. I put everything into my work. There's a bird and flowers, and I guess there were flowers there. And so they went into this piece as well. They're just embedded and stitched in, and leaves. And you can see the Mediterranean. So it has a movement to it. This piece has not been used on a Torah. I'm hoping to find a synagogue that would like to use it. It's meant to be used. It's fully lined. It's structured well. Putting it out there, putting that out there. Thank you so much. Okay, so this looks like a big tangle, but this is the spies, and they're creatures that are on here. And there's grapes, and they're all in here. And I have it in my hand, so if it doesn't show as well, Caleb is there in the orange. He's on the edge. Yeah, there he is. So he is larger than the rest of them. And again, there's a lot of different textiles and pieces of clothing. His head is made from a shirt that I wore 20 years ago. I keep everything, and you never know where it ends up. And I also collect a lot of Indian textiles because they're so beautifully embellished. And yeah, there it is. It runs about 48 inches by 48 inches. It's quite big, 4 feet by 4 feet. And they carry grapes. Rabbi Aliza will talk about that as well. The grapes that they carry, they're very large. They're bigger than themselves, these grapes. So I made them large, and they're all felted, and they're all stitched in different colors. And the piece has a lot of depth. It's about 6 inches deep. I'd say 6 inches deep. So it's hard to tell by a picture, but maybe it will be exhibited somewhere and be able to see the depth of it. They're hidden behind their movement, behind their strings of where they're going. I wanted them to move in and out because they should have some movement. Thank you so much.
Rabbanit Aliza, would you share kind of your experience of learning with Melanie and some of the insights that and reactions to this work?
Yes. First of all, Melanie, every time I see your work, I'm just kind of blown away. It's so beautiful. It's fair. I'm still seeing the artwork. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess I find that every time I study a piece of Torah, I look at it differently because of what's going on in my life, in the world around me. So every time the Torah portion rolls around, there's something else that's really interesting about it. And this week, I watched part of the January 6th hearings. I don't know if anybody else here watched part of the hearings or read about them. And the focus was really on on people who were pressured into doing something that they thought was not right. And there were some people who were able to withstand that pressure despite crazy things that were happening to them, despite people coming to their houses and despite threatening emails and letters and phone calls, they were able to stand up and say, I need to do what I know is right, despite the pressure that is being exerted upon me. And as I was thinking about this and these incredible people, right, I really was also thinking about the Torah portion, because the Torah portion is also about 12 people who go into the land of Israel, and 10 of them decide that they are going to, I don't know if you want to say spread lies about the land, but instead maybe emphasize the parts that are really difficult, share their inability to have faith in God, and conspire to lead the people to not want to enter the land. And only two of them are able to stand up and say, no, we're going to stand up for what's right. And, sometimes people say, oh, the Torah is written so long ago, it has nothing to tell us, it's just kind of ancient. And here it is, like right in the news. This is what it's all about. It's what is it that allows some people to withstand the pressure and to stand up for what's right? And what can we learn from the spies, and specifically from Joshua and Caleb? Now, it's really interesting because when at the beginning stages, when Melanie was showing me her work, I saw that she had made Caleb a bigger and kind of a little bit more ornate than everybody else. Melanie, do you want to show everybody?
Yeah, see if I can see it. I'm just gonna. All right, I don't know if it can come up. So here he is. He's attached, and he is larger. He is twice as large as Joshua. He's really big. So really wild. It's pretty wild, but that's how I work.
And so it was clear to me that Melanie saw Caleb as being the hero, right? Like he is the one.
He's a leader, right?
He's the leader. And even though Joshua is also a resistor, you didn't make him as big as Caleb.
No, they're all about the same size, and he is larger, as that's what I understood from our studies, that I made him larger because he was a leader.
Yeah.
Simple.
So they're both dissenters, they're both resistors, but they have two really different backstories. And just when I mentioned backstory, right, that also has so much to do with Melanie's art, because it feels like every piece that she put into her artwork has a backstory. It comes from someplace. This is a shirt that I had 20 years ago. This is a piece of fabric that my friend gave me. This is a jacket that I bought at a store and then I didn't like, like all these things. And our characters in the Torah also have backstories. And sometimes the Torah tells us what those characters' backstories are, and sometimes it doesn't. And the Midrash comes in to fill in the gaps there. So we've got one backstory for Joshua, which is pretty clear in the Torah. Joshua is Moses's number two. He's his apprentice. He's with him all the time. Everywhere Moses goes, Joshua goes. And so it really makes sense to us that Joshua is going to be a resistor to the conspiracy of the other spies. And we know that Midrash tells us, or the Torah tells us, that Joshua's name used to be Hoshea, and Moses changed it and added the letter Yud so that it becomes Yehoshua, or Joshua. So his name used to be Hosea, now his name is Yehosea, or Joshua. And the Midrash tells us that's because before he left, he went to Moses to get some support. And the support that Moses gave him consisted of a name change. The Yud stood for God's name. And he said, I'm going to change your name and add the Yud for God so that God will be with you as you go on this journey. And so I think that Joshua in many ways is kind of like, the religious guy that we expect to stand in Moses's, to be Moses's guy. Like in Harry Potter, when Harry says, I'm Dumbledore's man through and through, so Joshua is Moses' man through and through. And we wouldn't really expect anything different. But Caleb is really interesting because Caleb is not as directly connected to Moses. I mean, he's connected to Moses because according to the Midrash, he's married to Miriam, Moses's sister. But it seems like he doesn't have that same kind of relationship with Moses. And people are not sure which way Caleb is going to go. Is he going to be part of the spies' conspiracy, or is he going to stand up and say, that they're wrong? And even Caleb himself it seems like, at some points in the journey doesn't know where he's going to end up. And the Midrash gives us 2 clues as to why Caleb was able to stand up and resist the other spies. The first clue is that it says that when Caleb goes to the land of Israel, he takes a little side journey. He goes to Hebron, and he goes to the cave of Machpelah, to where the patriarchs and the matriarchs are buried. And he prostrates himself on the ground on the graves of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah, and not Rachel, and Leah and Adam and Eve. And he asks for help from his ancestors, which is a really interesting scene, right? Where he knows that there's something, like he might not be able to do it on his own. And so he goes to the graves of his ancestors and he asks for help from them. That's number one. I love that scene. I love that scene because Dvir and I were just talking about this before, and Melanie, there's an amazing educator. His name is Chaim Perry. If you've ever heard of the Yamin Ord youth villages, he was the educational director for this youth village in Israel. And he wrote a book about the kind of education that he does, or that he did. Because these youth villages take kids from all kinds of really tough backgrounds, bring them together to live in this village. And a lot of them do not have good relationships with their parents, if they have relationships with them at all. And so it's not like you can point the way that Joshua could point to Moses and say, oh yeah, I'm just like him. They don't have anyone in their life where they come from who they can point to. So what Chaim Perry does is he teaches them to find anchors in their past and anchors in their future. In other words, maybe it's true that in your immediate family, you don't have anybody who you can really rely on, you don't have a good relationship with, or you don't have someone that you aspire to be like. But he tells them, look back, try to find somebody maybe in your family's past who you could really identify with. And so they're able to look away from the immediate. I think a lot of what religion is to take us away from the immediate and give us a wider view of things. So he takes them away from this immediate bad situation, and he says, find the people in your past who you can hold on to. And then find the person who you want to be in the future and hold on to that. And what I think Caleb is doing is that he's finding an anchor in his past, even though the spies around him are not good for him and they're not the kind of people he wants to be. He goes farther back. He goes to the cave of Machpelah and he roots himself in those people who he wants to be like. And so I think this is a great model. I think even listening to the January 6th hearings a little bit, I heard people talking about both of those things. I heard them talking about her grandmother, right? If you listen to any of the testimony,
Yeah.
right? Who she wants to be like, right? Who her role model is. And then we heard someone talking about, at the end of my life, who do I want to say that I was, right? So being able to make those anchors in your past and your future is a beautiful model of being able to be strong, even when things around you are not so clear. I think maybe I'll stop here. I have a lot more to say, but I want to be able to open it up. So we can stop here.
Yes. So there's so much richness in the ideas and in the conversation. But I'm curious also if you both want to share a little bit also in the process of learning with one another.
Oh, hang on, I put up a chat thing there. I found it so inspiring. It would not have been the first choice. I'm so glad that you, Devere, that you picked something that was very challenging to study, and also opening it up with Rabbi Aliza to have an understanding together. Like, we've had a couple of sessions, and I've done a little bit more reading on my own. That there was some adversity here, and there was challenges, and it wasn't perfect. It wasn't all beautiful and perfect, and I had to think about that as well. This was a lot of conflict here, and how do I portray conflict in art? Like, that's such a huge thing to think about. My piece isn't a beautiful little painting. It's got a lot of texture and a lot of depth, and hopefully that shows that there is conflict, and we have conflict, like Rabbi Aliza says, in our lives. And in January 6th hearings, we have all these conflicts, and how do we overcome them? So I found that really interesting. So for me, it's taking my hands to being busy and my hands to making things. That's how I can relieve my conflict. That's how I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add that at first, when we started the project, Melanie was thinking about putting the spies on the Torah mantle. And then we thought there's too much conflict there. We couldn't do it.
No, it didn't work. So it was a study of the land as well. I mean, the whole land. I mean, I'm sure the geography has changed from then to now, and whatever, but mine is very contemporary because that's the land that I know, where the Mediterranean is, where the north is, where the south is. But they traveled, they went all the way around. So that's why I thought the mantle would be a good thing, because they were going around. Weren't they traveling in circles? And maybe they ended up where they began. I don't know. That's how I came to that.
Richard has a question.
So, wow, what a discussion. Aliza, it's wonderful to hear you.
Great to see you.
It's been a while and I miss you. Anyway, what you've brought together just wonderfully the conjunction between the situation the spies were in and really where we are, at least, more than just Americans, what hopefully a piece of the Western world is in. And that is the distinction or the conjunction between truths and facts. And it really, when I start to think about it, it's amazing. Look, the quote, fact of the matter is, the spies did not lie.
Mm-hmm.
The spies went out, they thought they had a job to do, they came back and they told the truth. Their quote, sin was being libelous against the land of Israel. That's one possibility of their sin. Or their sin was that they didn't believe that, in spite of the fact that, whoa, this is not going to be easy place to conquer. God will help us. So that was a dealing with facts. And then to counterpose that, the truth is, which they didn't quite get, in which Joshua and Caleb certainly did, and Caleb perhaps amazingly so did. No, there's the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is that God's going to get us through this because he's given it to us. He has said, you will enter this land. Why didn't we simply accept the truth? This is so resonant in American politics now. It's going to be mind-boggling. There is, unfortunately, we live in a time where it's less and less clear, at least to some portions of the population, of what facts are. even though you'll see a clear video, you'll see clear reporting, and oh no, that wasn't what it was. Right, it was just tourists going to the capital, etc., all that kind of stuff. And then there is the idea of, wait a minute, there is a truth. There's a truth that a group of people who decide to break the law and invade a space that is not theirs to invade, that's called wrong. And really, in a way, what you presented here is this kind of balance between those two things, of how we need to be able to adjudicate between truth and fact, and get through it. And that's probably really the issue of this Parsha. And of course, God, the ultimate judge, he says, no, I know the truth, and you folks, you didn't have what it takes, and you're going to be wandering, and more importantly, really, you're going to be dying in this land that you didn't believe that you would get out of, and only your descendants or only your children will get past. Anyway, so this is brought up our current American dilemma. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Richard, it's such a tragedy, right? Especially because you think, oh, they left Egypt, they got the Torah, they've come so far, they're going to do well, and then something like this happens, and it's just so dispiriting. But I think the nice thing about it, just to give a little bit of optimism, right, is that God believes in the next generation. God believes in the children, that they might be different from their parents. And so I'm going to hold on to that piece, right? Maybe it's true then, and maybe it's true now, that maybe the future, will hold great promise. Although I don't know.
Wonderful thought.
Amen. We hope so. Yeah.
I mean, our lives aren't without the conflict, and they didn't want to go there. They came back and they said, everything is too big. It's not going to work. It's not going to be this. It's not going to be that. I mean, that was so interesting. I thought that was so contemporary to hear that and study that.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't so much that they didn't want to be there. Look, this is a slave people. They were promised something, but the promise was like, it was out there in the air. Mm-hmm. And when their leaders saw the reality is really hard. It was, who knows, maybe slavery wasn't so bad. It's hard for us as Americans and Canadians to understand that. But when you're oh, thank you, right. Right. That maybe the oppressor I know is better than the unknown. And it was scary as heck. Really, it certainly was. And by the way, remember, we have to stop thinking like contemporary Jews. If we're going to encounter this Torah, we must understand God is unknown to them. We've had millennia of engagement with God, with the Rabbanit Shalom. We have a long history in which we have a quote religion. They didn't have a religion. This was all, oh, wait a minute. Moses says, and we encountered, and we didn't know what it meant. It's all really up in the air for them. It's very scary. And I think we need to have the empathy to the generation of the Midbar to understand that.
Yes, and I think that in some ways, though, it's the same thing. People prioritize security then and now. Then they needed the security of, I've just come out of Egypt. I just need to be taken care of. I don't want to go into the land of Canaan. I don't want to have to work so hard. I don't want to have to put my life in danger. It's real.
Yeah.
Right. And unfortunately, that's a problem even today, right? That people prioritize security over other things.
Yep.
So there's a question on the chat. Why do Israelite leaders call or view themselves grasshoppers? Why did it come out as grasshoppers?
So I bet Rabbi Kahana has a much better answer than I do
Okay.
on that.
All right. Thank you, Ronnie.
Yeah. I think that.
Were the grasshoppers different then? Were they locusts? Were they different? Perhaps?
I wonder, I don't know why they specifically choose grasshoppers, but it's a sense of how inferior they feel, right? Like we saw ourselves as grasshoppers. Here are these great big people, these giants in our eyes, and we are grasshoppers. Sometimes people, you've got to have that right sense of knowing who you are. And if you have that insecurity of seeing yourself as a grasshopper, then you're going to see everybody else as being bigger and more powerful than you. And sometimes
it could have been just a metaphor. It could have just been,
yeah,
right? It could have just been, oh, they're smarter than us and they're larger, but they could have been the same size, but they just seem more powerful.
Yeah, but I wonder though, Melanie, if it's also like, besides the smallness, it's also like something a little bit disgusting. I don't know if back then they thought of grasshoppers as being like insects, and I wonder if there's something there as well. Like we in comparing ourselves to them, we saw ourselves as grasshoppers. I think Joan had a question.
There we go. No, I had a few different comments. First of all, about the grasshoppers, they travel, they wander. And that could have been a metaphor for the people wandering in the desert for 40 years. That they wander, grasshoppers wander. The other comment I had was the cover, the Torah cover, Melanie, is gorgeous. I've seen your work before. We're cousins, and I've seen her work before, and it's beautiful. If you hadn't wanted it to go into a shul to be on a Torah cover, there's a lot of conflict in the Torah. Would Caleb and Joshua not have been a time to put on the Torah cover if you didn't want to use it as a Torah cover, if you just wanted to use it as a piece of art? Because there is conflict in the Torah. There's a lot of conflict, I think, in the Torah, if I'm not mistaken. The other thing was, were you involved with a school? Was it a school that you worked with as well? What did the children have to say about the fighting between them? And did they have any ideas on how to put the artwork together?
I didn't work with this in a school. I did other projects in schools.
Okay, but not
recently,
this one.
Not this particular one. No, not this year. I worked in the York Region Board, not the Jewish Day School. Maybe for next year, it's possible. Between COVID and teaching, it's just been it's a scramble. It's been a scramble. So it would be a really interesting project to see what they would come up with for this.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
You're welcome.
I think it was really important to separate the two. I mean, the Torah mantle, it could still have, I'd have to have 12, and I'd have to have grasshoppers, and I'd have to have all sorts of other things on there. Maybe another one. This one was just too silver and too pristine.
It's magnificent, Melanie. It's just
too silver. It was just too rich. And I just wanted to deal with, first, it actually came out, first we were studying the land. So I was studying the geography of the land, and that just clicked, that this piece had to go with that. I'm ready to do another. It's continuous. So.
Yeah, Joan, it's such an interesting question about whether to put the conflict on the Torah cover. I guess I kind of recoiled from that because for me at least, the Torah scroll is the image of the ideal. And even though the stories are very real, the conflict is very real, when I think about what the Torah symbolizes, it kind of symbolizes striving for the ideal. And that's that's why personally I had that.
That's fine, and that's good. I just thought as a piece of art, if it wasn't going on an actual Torah, but it was just a piece of artwork, then I separated the two of them from that.
So many projects, so little time. It's just continuous. Just continuous.
But also what Joan brings up about kind of the distinctness of these two images, I think it's very interesting to see them side by side. And I'm curious, what do you make of the differences between how the spies, they're suspended when they can kind of like, they flow in the wind as Melanie had described, whereas the Torah mantle is fixed. And there are different ways, that different aspects of the movement. Something that Richard said about the truth and just kind of looking at the land and how that adorns the Torah as the symbol of truth versus the flimsiness of the spies, or other elements about movement that you can kind of think about. What do you make of the movement?
Are you directing that to me? Yeah. We had a discussion, you and I, about the movement. With the Torah mantle has movement when it's lifted off. So the movement is lifting it off and presenting the Torah, right? So there is a movement in that way. This particular piece has a movement on the way that it is, the way that it looks, and the way that it presents itself. They both have movement, but in a different sense. That's what I get from that. Yeah. See, that if you lift that off a Torah, it will present something else. It will present a scroll underneath, and it will present something else. You have to take the belt off, the wimple. You have to move that, lift this off. Someone has to hold that mantle, that whole Torah, and someone has to hold the mantle. And there is movement in the synagogue.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that I have is not really fully formed, but maybe you guys can help me. I was really struck working with Melanie and with Richard that one of the questions that you both asked me kind of immediately was, we would be studying a section and you would say, but I need the images. I need to know what the images are.
Right.
And I never had studied like that before, like focusing on the images. That was a totally different way for me to think about things. And so I tried to focus on the images. And today when I was looking at the Torah text itself, I thought to myself that the text itself for me are the images. You know, the way that I relate to Torah is I look at those letters, and the letters themselves are so beautiful. Like, they're the images that I see first. And both of you have this other way of looking at Torah where you read the text and you see other images that come forth from the text. And I thought that was so amazing for me to really learn from both of you.
Interesting.
And also, speaking of the images, Melanie, you described kind of your entry point in what you were trying to create of the spies was based off of a different type of image from a different culture. Would you care to share with us that inspiration of what inspired the image of the story and kind of this?
Well, I just saw these big hunky guys walking along, and they may have been very tired, and they were traveling, and they were carrying grapes, and they were carrying, when I Googled it, there were so many images of these great big guys carrying these things over their shoulders. They had to bring things back to show that the land is interesting, and you might like it there, you might not like it. So I made these very primitive. They're very, very primitive in their mood, the way they are.
Mhm.
You know, they're not. I mean, I could have done something very, yeah, that's a better picture, very pristine, but they're not. I found them, they were primitive. So let's make them like that. Let's give them big boots and big hands, and we don't have any reference to what they actually look like. You know, people have evolved. They could have been a different, you know, different. They could have been really large. They could have been really small. I don't know. So I just went with what I thought about. I just went, and you can see the stitching on the one with the big feet. All my stitching has movement too. So I like to do a running stitch where it has movement, and it goes in a direction, it goes another direction. So in the way I've put them all together, there's conflict, and every piece of fabric that I use comes from somewhere else. So they're United Nations in those guys. There's pieces from India, and there's pieces from Africa, and there's Chinese pieces, and everything from everywhere. So I've put that all together because that's what I have. And they're rough looking. They're not elegant, and they're not really beautiful. I didn't see them as a beautiful people. They're just rough and tumbling type of people here. So that's what I created. That's what spoke to me.
I wanted to add something about the pieces kind of fluttering in the wind. At the end, toward the end of the story, God says that Caleb and Joshua are not going to die in the desert. And the verse there says, because they had a different spirit, or Caleb specifically, Ruach Acheret Taita Imo. The word Ruach means wind or spirit.
Oh.
So it's really interesting the way that you have your spies kind of having the spirit move them almost in different ways.
And I guess the spirit, I am that way with when I sew and I work. Like I say, my work isn't tidy, and it's got a real spiritualness to it. It's not elegant, and it's very simplified here. But there is a spirit. There's a spirit that comes out when I work that my husband has said to me that perhaps my work speaks more than myself. Perhaps.
Richard, I see that you're eager with another comment. So
this is so rich. First of all, the notion of different images. And I get Aliza's issue. She's a Torah scholar. I'm assuming that your main confrontation with this thing we call Torah is through text, language. You're educated. I mean, they're super educated, etc. And the text itself, interestingly enough, of course, reverberates with all sorts of other, midrashim and different commentaries and comments that you've heard over your life. And they're so kind of, you can't read a word without, quote, hearing other things.
Yes.
But I also understand that you're not living in the world of images, which artists frequently are. And so when we hear a word, we have the tendency, in fact, to see images. And so, but you know what? We all do. Sure, the word stop is a word, but then you think stop sign, and then you think, oh, wait a minute. The last time I said to someone stop was when they were doing something that they had to stop, and that image summons up in your brain. So images, especially for people, us accursed artists, are our world in which the meanings of word are infused with images. And so the same thing when it's true. When I sit and learn Torah, I mostly think in images. Yeah, that's that's kind of the peculiar way that an artist engages this text. And the more more educated you are in Torah, the more though you allow those images to come in to also the commentaries and all that kind of stuff. So that's a very important insight to this whole thing of how can we understand Caleb and how can we understand Joshua. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is the notion of the Torah object itself. So the idea of taking this piece that that Melanie made and making it into perhaps a parochas, a Torah, a Torah cover, right? Well, it's funny. We treat Torah in a lot of different ways. When you first said, Aliza, about, oh, I would like to see the Torah as sacred and holy, and that which is containing it as sacred and holy, and not about all the stuff that's in it. Okay, very, very understandable, and that's the way most Torah covers have been conceived of. But did you know that? But for us, the Torah is something that, okay, it's encased in something. We take off the casing, right? And on Mondays and on Thursday, we open this thing up and we read it and we look at the letters and we hopefully understand what it says and we engage in it. Very different from another Israelite people, the Samaritans, who, when they take their Holy Torah out, which is almost identical to ours, and they take it up and put it in front of their people, that Torah is never read. News to me. I just learned this. It is venerated as an object of holiness. They have codes and they have the text of their Torah, but not in that scroll. And that scroll is a venerated object, which we kind of waffle between. We certainly think of it as a venerated object. We kiss it. We're very, very careful around it. But we also don't hesitate to open it up and read it. Read it like any text. This is the Torah, right? So it's an interesting thing of how both different Jews, but also different Israelites approach this thing called Torah and our holy text. Either a veneration as an object or veneration as a thing to grab a hold of and listen. One of the things I love to do in shul, I love to do Hagba. Oh, I'm holding it. It's so satisfying. It's a real physical thing, very different than its spirituality in its way, for what it's worth.
Interesting.
Melanie,
Yes.
what got you involved in this idea of creating these different projects around making these Torah mantles? What inspired you to begin this, and how did you get involved? And what does it mean to you as well?
Oh, it has great meaning, but as an art project, the first one, the gold one, I applied for a grant from the UJA of Toronto, United Jewish Appeal, and there was just a few recipients, and they gave me a lot of money, and they said, do whatever you want. And I thought, well, I've got to do something spiritual, and I've got to study. And at the time I was making jewelry. I also dabble in making jewelry. So the stones were what inspired me to study. Where were these beautiful stones, the carnelian and the beryl, and there were stones that weren't even available now, and the emeralds, and I don't remember all of them. But anyways, I did this big study. I mean, this was I think 2005, maybe 2001. I don't remember. But I thought I should do something holy. I should do something. They said to do whatever you want, make it whatever project you want. So I decided to do a Torah mantle, and I had to figure out how the top goes, the physicalness of it, and make it heavy enough to wrap around. This one was used for my both sons' bar mitzvahs. So that was quite exciting. And then to study about what the Kohanim wore, their garments. I'm a fashion person. I've always studied fashion. I used to dress windows. So the fashion about it had to be a garment of some sort. And on their garments, they had 52 pomegranates. That's what I read. I could be wrong if I remember correctly. So there's 52 pomegranates on this done in stitchery. And they run inside, and then they also had bells on the top, the bottom of their clothes. And I got like so excited. That's just like, oh, that's I gotta have those bells, and I gotta have that jewelry on there, and I gotta study those, what the order of the stones are. So that became one project that it took a year to make that piece, because like I say, it's all done with thread. There's no fabric in there. I make the fabric. I actually make the fabric. So then I thought, well, simple enough. I did the top, I had it made. It's a hard, oval top that goes on top. And I had my artist make me two. So I thought, I may as well make another one. I may as well do another one, make a companion. And that one has been sitting. I did the silver on it, and it's been sitting for 10 years. It's not been easy. I just put it away in a drawer. And sometimes as an artist, I revisit, I go back and I think about something and I revisit. And I had to make a second one just because I had the gold one. I may as well make a silver one, but it didn't have a story on it. It had nothing. It was just silver. And it was in another show. It's been in Baycrest in the museum. I mean, it's beautifully finished, but it had no story to it. And when we started to study, we studied the land in this opportunity. So I thought, I'm going to work on that Torah mantle, because this is really bothering me. It's been sitting in my drawer for 10 years, and it's nice, but it's nothing special. It had no story to it. So I continued with this one. But then putting, after our discussions of putting the spies on this one, it just didn't, do another one. I'll just do another piece. I have the time now. Teaching has not been, I haven't been as busy teaching this year. So I have the time to sit and work. And that's what I love to do. It's my passion. So that's what I do. So one led into another, and I do have enough fabric for another one. And I don't, it's just calling. There's a calling. As an artist, there's a calling. So I just have to do it. It's something we just have to do. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you both for going so in depth and taking on this project. Oh yes, Ricky.
My friend, my colleague.
Hi, Melanie.
There.
It's absolutely beautiful. I've known Melanie and her beautiful. I admired her work for many years, and it's a pleasure to see all the different venues where her work is appreciated and admired. What I wanted to say, in Judaism, we have a wonderful concept which is called Hidur Mitzvah, and this is why when we make a Torah mantle, it's to protect it, to protect the Torah from damage. But we make it beautiful because we have this concept of beautifying objects of religious. We put a white tablecloth on Shabbat, and we use our nice dishes because we are elevating the Shabbat, our things that we use for the candlesticks and everything. When you beautify it, you elevate it. And by beautifying these Torah mantles and the gold one and this new one here, it's elevating it. It's making it even more special. This is just a mantle, but it encloses the Torah itself. So in fact, it reflects on the beauty of the Torah and the pleasure of having it around and dealing with it.
Thank you, Ricky.
Yeah, thank you, Ricky. This conversation has been so interesting. It's made me realize that we're kind of engaged in a double endeavor. We are uncovering, when I learn Torah, I try to uncover truths, uncover ideas. And at the same time, we're also engaged in the covering, right? In the beautifying and the Hidur Mitzvah, as you said, Ricky, the beautification of the mitzvah. And I think that what this project, what this these collaborations have led me to is to think more about how covering is sometimes an uncovering. And I'm really grateful for that.
Wonderful observation.
Thank you. Yeah. And to add to that idea is also what you said earlier when you were sharing your Torah thoughts, Rabbanit Aliza, of how religion gives us perspective and allows us to see the aerial view. And when we see the Torah, the image of the Torah mantle, looking at the entire land, giving us that perspective of the aerial view, and then we zoom all the way back in and we see the experience of the spies where they're entangled and they're with all of the human challenges of everyday life. They get scared, and in that fear, they lose themselves. And if you look at the numerology of the word chagav for grasshopper, it's the same as the numerology for ahava, for love. And in that moment, they saw the same word, the same letters, and they looked at it just from a different perspective. And when the fear overwhelmed them, they lost their own sense of love of themselves. And the art that you've produced together is one that gives us both the perspective and allows us to sit in the suspense of the complexity. So thank you both. And I wish everyone a beautiful Shabbat Shalom, where each of you shlach yourselves out into the world and engage in the same process of stepping into your own shoes. And what image of Israel, what image of the promised land do you see for yourselves if you're able to report back? And you can report back next week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much, dear. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for everything.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Thanks all.
Thank you so much. Thanks for Richard for all your insights.